Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and welcome to part 2 of Ryzen 3rd Gen memory overclocking and FCLK and all of that. So, last video we answered the question, does it make sense to go past, well, mostly answered the question, does it make sense to go past 3800? It doesn't. Actually, depending on your FCL, like, depending on your Infinity Fabric, even 3800 might be pushing it a bit too far. But, yeah, it didn't answer, like, what do you do with your FCLK if your RAM is bad, right? Like, what if your memory doesn't do more than, like, 3200 megahertz? And so that's what I set out to test today, where basically I was, like, just tested a whole bunch of low frequencies. Also, I added some, like, really intense settings to see, like, how far can you push the memory system if you just have no concern for any level of practicality whatsoever. So yeah, so first of all, 3200 megahertz, and here we see something really, really interesting at the low frequencies, which is that, you know, if you run 3200 megahertz CL16, it is just, I mean, 3200 megahertz with 1600 FCLK, it is just straight up slower than if you run 1900 FCLK. Right? Like, which is, I mean, I should highlight the results I want to look at. At this point, this chart is too big. I mean, there's too many results in this. Anyway, but what I do find really interesting is that, yeah, 1900 is just straight up faster than 1600. And 1800 is basically the same latency, right? 1800 gets the same latency as 1600. It gets slightly better read performance, much better write, much better copy. Like, so basically, it seems to be that if there's a 200, if you have a 200 megahertz FCLK advantage over your UCLK, you can mostly negate the downside of the latency hit. Because the thing is, if you're running 1633 against 1600, then, like, yeah, 1633 is just straight up worse than 1600, but 1800 is a win. And we see similar things at higher frequencies still. So, for example, 3400, which we have all of these. Yeah, and this is when I first started noticing that these results were just all over, like, you know, like the 3200 megahertz results already look kind of strange. At 3400, I was like, okay, well, aliens. So, anyway, what we have going on here is that 1700 with 1900 is, again, really, really quick, but not quite as, like, it's not, you know, it's not quite catching up as hard as, like, 1900 on 1600 was straight up faster than 1600, but 1700 has lower latency. Slightly better read, worse write because that's an FCLK benchmark, and worse copy. So here it's just like, okay, kind of pick your poison, right? You can go with 1900 and it'll probably work fine, or you can go with 1700 and it'll probably work fine. Like, there's not really, like, also these two, the read results are basically margin of error. So here they're basically matched, right? So you have this situation where either configuration works. 1700 is obviously easier to run than 1900, so that's kind of interesting. Then I went to 3466. At 3466, I tested basically the entire range. So from 1900, well, I didn't test 1800 because by 1833, we can already see that this is a bad idea, right? So 3466, so 1733 versus 1733, you know, you could argue that 3466 you would still want to run 1900. So from this round of testing here, I started to basically, I have a theory that goes, you want your FCLK, if you're running a low memory frequency and you can run an FCLK that's 166 megahertz higher than your UCLK or more, you want to run the higher FCLK for overall performance, because, like, here we're looking at what, like 2.4 nanoseconds worth of latency difference between the low latency configuration and the, you know, higher latency configuration, but we get more read speed, we get more write speed, we get more copy. Like, we just, bandwidth-wise, we win. And the thing to keep in mind with Ryzen 3rd Gen is that it has great big blobs of L3 cache. Like, that's kind of the whole idea, like, the whole, because the whole way Ryzen 3rd Gen is built is actually relatively high latency. Arguably high, I think it actually gets on average higher latencies. Actually, in general, it just runs higher latencies than 2nd Gen. So AMD decided to compensate for that with piles and piles of L3 cache. And in that scenario, you're not so much latency bound. It's like you just want to be able to get as much data, you know, you want to just have more memory bandwidth, ideally. So Yeah, and 3 nanoseconds here, especially like going from like it's not even 3, right? Like going from 69.8 to 72.2, just not really a big difference in latency, but the throughput is significantly better. So here it makes sense to run 1900, but something like 1866, like your read's now basically equivalent, your write advantage is going away, and your copy advantage, like you could probably still argue that you can run like 1866 makes sense. But by the time you hit 1833, it's just like, nope. Like you start like if you go below 1833 at 1733 UCLK, it's just like, okay, that's going to be worthless. And then I also tested 3533, which is right here, and I only did 2 tests on that one where it's like, okay, 1900 still just about, actually, no, it doesn't. Because the other thing to keep in mind is like as your UCLK gets higher and higher, right, your FCLK is already going to be pretty high. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. So at like 3533, you want to run 1766, even if your CPU can do 1900 FCLK stable, which like not all CPUs will be able to do that. Anyway, so that I found really, really interesting is just like, yeah, at low frequencies, the FCLK rules are a little bit different. You actually want to run as much, like, based on how far you can push your FCLK, you may or may not want to run your FCLK maxed out. I'll get to some, like, basically I decided to make these charts. Well, this chart right here for it, where it's like, okay, so let's say you have a rock of a CPU, you know, a total potato, and it doesn't go past 1766, which I've not heard of a chip that bad yet, but I don't know. Maybe they exist. And if you have a chip that bad, then yeah, you're basically like already at like 33, like 3200, you can probably get away with 1766 FCLK. That should still perform well. But if you're at like 3333, you'd want to drop down to 1666, 3400 to 1700, 30, right? Like these you want to actually like have synchronized the lower speeds, but 3200 you can still run 1766. Now, if you go to 1800 FCLK, you'd still want to 3200, 1800. We already saw the results last time. That's good. So you want to run 1800. But 3333, I'd honestly drop down to 1666. Then just go synchronized from there. Just stay synchronized from there all the way up to 1800, which is, 3600 megahertz, which is where the FCLK stops on the CPU. So CPUs, I'm not sure what the average chip will hit, but like my chip does 1900. So, and I have one chip. So, I have no idea how, like, I would assume there are like 0.1% or maybe 1% CPUs out there that can do 1933 FCLK. And then below that, we get the 1900s, the 1866 chips, the 1833 chips, and the 1800 chips, right? And for each of these, you basically have like a different like effect, like maximum memory ceiling. So like on an 1833 chip, you want to stop at 3666, and you want to run max FCLK all the way up to like say 3333, and past that, you want to actually run FCLK synced to UCLK because, like, if we look at the results, right, with enough FCLK, you can offset the latency hit, which is kind of interesting. But once you're, like, if you're doing, right, like, this is the perfect example. If your FCLK only does 1633 and you're running 3200 megahertz, it does not make sense to run 1633. It literally just makes things worse across the board, except for your, like, write and copy. And your copy's slightly better, and your write is worse. But, like write is slightly better, but your latency is significant, well, not necessarily significantly worse, but it is worse, and your read speed is actually down. So at that point, it's just like, okay, here you can run 1600 to 1600, but you would get more performance if you ran 1600 to 1800, right? So that's kind of the idea behind this right here, is just like, depending on what frequency you're running, well, depending on what your maximum FCLK is, you have like an optimal FCLK configuration for lower speeds. And, once you start getting up into the high memory speeds, like from like 3466 up, there you want to start synchronizing it, because at low speeds, like at 2133, like you just want as much FCLK as possible. It doesn't really matter that it's completely out of sync with your UCLK, because the thing is the FCLK actually affects overall CPU performance just on its own. So it's kind of like, basically there's a bit of a balancing act going on between FCLK and memory clock. Well, yeah, FCLK and memory clock. We really don't need to care about UCLK that much, but because it's either 1-to-1 with memory or 2-to-1 with memory. So that's all that's going on with that. But yeah, so you end up with these kind of interesting, performance lines where it's just like, oh yeah, and here you like at 3600 megahertz, you just go to 1800, and then you go 1-to-1 all the way up. So yeah, anyway, hopefully this is helpful if you have memory kits that suck and a CPU that does decent FCLK, right? Like, it's kind of the whole point of this. And other than that, what did I want to show? Oh, I wanted to show bam, that. So yeah, I went and pushed the CPU like really hard. So we have like 37, 33, 12, 12, 8, 12, but unfortunately that isn't super, like, this is not super fast, because obviously like FCLK on its own has a huge performance impact on the entire memory system. So it's like 1866 FCLK with 3733 tight, like super tight timings, just loses to like a kind of, leisurely 3800 megahertz configuration, just because there's such a massive FCLK advantage. Like, because the 33, it's not even a massive difference of FCLK, it's 33 megahertz, and it basically negates, all of the gain. Like, it literally negates all of the like these timings, right? 33 megahertz of FCLK completely negates this timing advantage. So that's fun. So, but I figured like this memory kit that I'm doing this with is capable of, like, I've had it run at least on at least one motherboard. I've seen it do 4000 CL12. So the goal was like, okay, let's see if I can do 3800 CL12. No. The memory controller on my CPU just pretty much just falls right over if I try to do that. So that's like these results right here, where it's just like fail, fail, fail. Interestingly enough, I can still run really tight TRCD. So, TRCD-RD and TRP, I can still run those really, really tight. So like 1311, 811, 28-1T, that actually works. As weird as that looks, that works just fine. And that gives me about 64.6 nanoseconds. Like, the thing is, the latency really doesn't seem to be coming back down at this point. And I eventually tried to do like the 1311, 811, 28 timings, right? These settings right here, with like, where I also tried to tighten up the tertiary timings, and that just, like, it basically screwed 1900 FCLK. Like, I could no longer post at 1900 FCLK. I could post 1866, but I assume what basically happens is when the FCLK synchronize, like, with this much memory, I guess with the Titan tertiaries, like, the amount of data throughput that the memory hits, it's like you sync up the FCLK and it gets unstable and it dies. So yeah, I think it looks to me like the upper limits of what you can squeeze through the Infinity Fabric is about 57 gigabytes per second on these CPUs. Because yeah, like that's where all of the top results are just stopping. Like, I can't get past 5700 really on either copy. Like, this slightly gets past 5700. Read, you just straight up can't. All right, this, I think, yeah, it's like 50, yeah. So 5700 seems to be basically a wall. And then, like, I assume these settings would have gone slightly past 5700, and that's why they're not stable at all. Like, it just never posts. So, I don't know, maybe we'll see an AGESA that, like, fixes that, and then, pushing past 57 gigabytes per second might be possible. But yeah, in my testing at least, I can't get past 57 gig, like, at all. Well, here's like two results that go past 57 gigabytes. They're at insane voltages, this isn't even that tight, which I don't know why this one is working so well. It's like, I think honestly some of this is just margin of error in terms of IDA. Like, yeah, these two are margin of error for IDA. Like, that's just not that different. So yeah, but basically the limit for the Infinity Fabric seems to be somewhere around 6. Like, I don't think you can go, like, I don't think I've seen, well, I would be very, I'd love to see somebody break the 64 nanoseconds barrier. I'd love to see somebody get below that. I'm not saying it's impossible because I'm really not that great at memory overclocking. Also, I'm like the thing about dual rank memory is it does have great overall throughput, but I do believe that the way the memory controller interacts with it, it actually gives you a latency hit. So I might still have to test like 3800 megahertz CL, like I might have to try this memory, like these timings on a single rank memory kit, and that might bring down the latency a bit. But it's definitely going to send copy and write to hell. I mean, read to hell, because dual rank is just superior in those, like for throughput, dual rank just wins. So yeah, it might be possible to get the latency a little bit lower with single rank memory. This is also with gear down mode off. So for those of you who didn't know, gear down mode, basically, like I can't remember the technical specifications of what it does, but the performance impact is basically you trade a little bit of latency for more stability. It effectively behaves like performance-wise, it behaves kind of like if there was a 1.5T command rate, where it's like it's not quite as slow as 2T, but it's much more stable than 1T. So yeah, anyway, but with gear, like if you turn gear down mode off, you get, you know, more better latency performance. It's just less stability. But yeah, it's just like I can't, like this is the limit, I think. I don't think, well, at least for my chip, this seems to be the limit. The thing is, apparently the 3800Xs also have, on average, better memory controllers, which I think makes a lot of sense, because with the chiplets AMD is able to bin, like, the funny thing for Intel is, like, they can literally, like, you can get Intel i5s with, like, crazy good memory controllers if you just bin enough of them. Because obviously the memory control, because I think the 9600K is, like, based off of the same die as like a 9900K. So it's the same memory controller. It's just that the cores aren't necessarily as good. So for Intel, you can find like lower end CPUs with really great memory controllers, but AMD has chiplets. That means they can literally just bin IO dies and chiplets completely separate, and all of the crap IO dies can be paired up with the crap chiplets, right, with the crap CPU cores. And so you'll never, like, the probability of getting a 3700X with a really good memory controller is like much lower, as depending on how much effort AMD puts into their binning, which I think they put a lot of effort into their binning, because, you know, they have like 3900Xs to make and 3800Xs to make and that kind of thing. And it just, like, why would you, you know, throw, like, it kind of, like, to me it makes sense that, you know, you could have it as a selling point to just use all better chips in the better chips, right? Like, that's the whole point. Because you can get 9900Ks with absolutely atrocious memory controllers, and, you know, but you can also get like i5s with amazing ones. But I don't think you can get like a 3700X with an amazing memory controller. I think is pretty unlikely, because like AMD can just keep the good IO dies for 3800Xs and 3900Xs. There's nothing forcing them to put them into, you know, lower end SKUs, except if the high end SKUs weren't selling enough, so they'd have to, you know, produce more low end SKUs. But since right now all of the chips are sold out constantly, especially the 3900Xs, I don't, like, if anything, I'd be more worried that 3900Xs being made right now might be getting slightly worse IO dies than some being made later, because there's obviously like, you know, the demand is outpacing the supply right now. But yeah, so anyway, that's kind of like I think I'm done for now with messing with like memory settings on third gen, because yeah, like this is what, 40 different configurations test, like, well no, because there's also like 32 gig memory sticks that I want to test and that kind of thing. But that's like that's not going to go into, like, I'm done with messing with like the FCLK and memory clock and UCLK and timings relationships in terms of performance. I've still not tested any voltage scaling, by the way. Like I've basically gone with a bunch of, like, I set a bunch of voltages that seem to work, like just work for me, and I've not really validated that they're like optimal or anything. I've just kind of gone like, well, they're working right now, and changing them doesn't seem to make much of a difference. So yeah, but yeah, the performance scaling I find really, really interesting, and it does seem like 57 gigabytes is probably the upper limit. Maybe with more memory ranks, it might be possible, like your latency would probably get even worse, but you might be able to break the 57 gigabyte barrier without having to resort to like crazy timings. So Yeah, that's kind of that. With the memory, like it's it's an interesting platform, right? Because it's just like, okay, so now you need to strike. Yeah, like now you need to strike a balance between like your FCLK and your memory clock, depending on how good your CPU is and how good your memory is, right? If your memory is like if your memory is terrible, like 3200 or something, then just run 1800 FCLK or higher, right? You can just like I'll probably copy paste this chart, like this table, into a separate document, and I'll make that public. So yeah, if I do make that, that'll be down in the description below. And also, I think I've run out of things to say at this point, right? Yes, I have. That's all I really wanted to talk about, is just like lower frequency settings and like, pushing the limit of the memory controller. And so yeah, that's it for the video. And I will put so I will definitely just copy out this chart and all of this so that people can like reference this depending on what their memory is. Hopefully this makes sense, right? Like, yeah. Anyway, so there will be a link down in the description below for this. If you'd like, what else was, right? Outros, go like, share, subscribe. There we go. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. If you wanted to support me directly, there's a link down in the description for that. And there's also Teespring if you just want to buy AHOC themed merch like stickers, posters, hoodies, t-shirts, socks. There's a link to that in the description as well. And both of those help out with running the channel immensely. And yeah, thanks for watching, and goodbye.